So hi, this is Patrick Pauls and my co-host,
Mirage Ali.
And we're both IT professionals here to talk to you about how technology can impact business. Each episode, we're going to bring you insightful interviews and the latest topics in technology and business.
Thanks for spending some time with us today on the Smartbridge podcast. Let's begin.
Today, we have an interview with Anthony Lackey of ISS Facilities. He's the Senior VP of IT in the North American region. ISS Facilities has over 500,000 employees and they're a worldwide company, and they provide facility management services.
We've got a great interview in store for you today, where Anthony talks about implementing a vision of building the best labor management system in the world, and some of the challenges that ISS had to navigate to achieve them.
And some of those challenges include training and using metrics to highlight specific issues, and then being open to feedback from the end users.
What I found really remarkable for ISS to do was reduce their error correction down from 3% to 0.2% with the implementation of the project that they had.
You know, this is something that a lot of us here don't really take into account when it comes to IT. I mean, this is human capital management, and you think timesheets and people clocking in and out, having a little bit of variance there really isn't that big a deal. But when you actually take it down a notch and you look at it and you look at the metrics, someone clocking in or clocking out 7 or 8 minutes late can actually end up having a major impact on the labor cost and the downstream revenue when everything's tallied up at the end of the cycle or year or quarter, whatever metric they're dividing it up into.
That's a great point, because Anthony also brings up the overarching issue of the culture that is in place with the organizations and how a backwards mindset can hold the company back when they are trying to achieve the goals that they have.
And one of the most interesting things that I heard during his interview was that he was able to take what would be a friction point and turn it into a series of collaborations and internal competitions, healthy competition that allowed the employees to actually better themselves and overall change the entire mindset and culture of the company.
Without further ado, let's get right into the interview where the Vice President of Enterprise Systems at Smartbridge, Victor Lang, talks to Anthony Lackey.
Hello, welcome to the Smartbridge podcast. This is Victor Lang. I'm Vice President of Enterprise Systems here at Smartbridge, and today we're going to talk about IT leadership and how to get things done through IT and the business. Today we have Anthony Lackey, CIO of ISS Facilities, joining us. He is been doing major initiatives throughout the business, driving through his leadership. And so I felt it would be a great opportunity for us to talk to him and understand different things that have happened at ISS, how he's driven it through his leadership and through IT. So Anthony, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you, Victor.
So I wanted to ask you, we at ISS Facilities is a worldwide company. You think you have over 100,000 employees worldwide?
No, we got actually 505,000.
500. So you guys have a huge number of employees ranging from all different skill levels, all different types of technologies in use, all different things kind of going on in the business. And I know the company has gone through many changes since you joined as the CIO. Can you elaborate on some of the different things that you guys have done? What are the business drivers behind that and how you've been involved from an IT leadership standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, probably for clarification's sake too. So I'm the Senior Vice President or CIO over technology, but here for the North American business, not for all of ISS. And we've got about 16,000 employees here in the U.S. Our biggest challenge when I arrived a couple of years ago, which is our biggest cost, is our labor. So we had a need. We were doing all of our payroll manually for the most part across the business, which is not uncommon in our industry for one. But our operators didn't have visibility to their labor on a more timely basis. We didn't have a good budgeting process for the operators, so they could really get a sense at a job level how they were performing. And it's really essential for the business. So our number one priority when we got in was to address our most precious asset, which is managing our labor. And that's how you either make or lose money in this business. Clearly, it's a low margin business, and labor is our number one asset, and managing that is critical. So really there were several initiatives over the last couple of years that we had to tackle to kind of pull all these pieces together. The first of which was putting in a world-class time and attendance system. And talking about leadership specifically on that subject, we established a very specific, but I'll say a high-end goal of building the best labor management system in the world. And that's a message that we shared from the very beginning. And it's interesting because, a company really hadn't had much transformation work in the past. There have been a lot of projects that have been started and stopped, and we had attempted prior to my getting here 3 different time and attendance systems, and they all failed to varying degrees. So we had a culture in the company of sort of a little bit of reluctance to whether that could even be done in the first place. So you go from struggling with 3 that didn't work, and of course our field users had lost a little confidence in what was coming out of the corporate office, and pivot onto that, wanting to have the best one in the entire world. And I remember some of the faces I got in the beginning from my own team, and even from some of the constituents we were trying to build in, like, you're out of your mind, But we held to that course, and we continue. That's one of the messages too, is throughout these projects of continuing to reinforce the vision and maintaining a relentless pursuit of that vision, and not letting the little hiccups that happen in these types of projects get in the way. Especially as a leader, I would say the number one thing is, even if you have doubts in your mind and inside, those are doubts that you share maybe with your wife and your boss, but you certainly don't share them with team members, and you don't share them with the people who you're trying to influence to participate in this. They have to believe, the dream just like you do. And that passion and consistency around that is critical. So in terms of speaking to that, though, I'm going to talk a little bit about what it was like before and what this project really helped us do. So the first piece of it was getting in this time and attendance system. And so we had manual payroll going in. Now with 16,000 employees having to submit timesheets every week, that means somebody's either doing it on paper in Excel, having to get that information in the office, somebody else has to key it into JD Edwards, and we were running about 3% correction checks, if you want to look at it that way. So as a manufacturer, we had a 3% defect rate, if you will, going into this, and that's way too high. Unfortunately, it's very common for our industry too, but that wasn't good enough for us. Our one of our drivers behind this was to get that under 0.5%. And I can tell you what we did. Right now we're running at 0.2%. That's from 3. The second one was making sure we're in compliance with all the Department of Labor and collective bargaining agreement rules, whether it's paying overtime properly, right? Making sure we're capturing everyone's time electronically. So if we were to get audited, we've got good records. Also, meal breaks, right? Time off, all those rules. And in the U.S. in particular, it's getting more and more complex because now we're having different meal break rules by state, even in some cases at the city level, having different rules for how many hours somebody needs to work before they get a break, and all those kinds of things. And you can imagine if you're doing your payroll manually in an environment like that, the likelihood of something being incorrect and getting you in a situation where you're out of compliance and you end up, with a class action suit or a challenge by the labor union, or worse yet, the Department of Labor comes in, not good, right?
Yes.
So that was a big one. And then the second part of it was just creating this visibility for our management team, okay? Because when you're doing manual payroll, let's say you've got a biweekly payroll cycle, that's 2-week period. And so if a guy works, say on Monday, and he's not getting paid until, 2.5 weeks later, that's the first time the managers would actually see the effect of that person's pay in their profit and loss statement. Well, the problem is if you got a job and you're running more hours than you should, they don't have any visibility to it until it's too late. And you can't make any course corrections in the month. So basically that month is shot. And with the kind of margins we have, it doesn't take a whole lot of those actions that are unknown to upper management before a job 2, 3, 4, 5, or 10, are losing money and ultimately affecting your branch. So that's a real big one, is having a budgeting tool, number one, to help set that up, and then having a vehicle to ultimately present that to management so they can see. And one of the other pieces that we did with this project was not only capture time and attendance in a very responsive way, but melded that together with the budgeting tool for the operators so they can maintain their current labor budgets, and then presented a dashboard ultimately where they can see that information on a daily basis. So today, as we've gone through this, now we have our senior management team and even local managers. I mean, they're down to our district managers at so the lowest management level in the company now have visibility to their job performance daily. And if you contrast that to seeing things really 5-6 weeks later to tomorrow, you can imagine the transformation that creates in the business.
Well, that's tremendous. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts into that, a lot of complexity, and it's impacting a lot of levels. I mean, I can imagine it's a huge challenge both from a technology and a business level. You being the CIO, and from your perspective, what are the challenges that you faced leading that major shift, that major business change?
Well, probably the most significant one is overcoming some of those cultural hurdles. You know, you've got a company, in this case, that had grown through acquisition over a number of years. It's a very localized business. So it's not like everybody's sitting in one room or one manufacturing plant where you can bring everybody together, sell them on the dream, et cetera. So, you know, winning over the hearts and minds of, 500-600 supervisors, 300 district managers, 40 general managers, and ultimately the employees, because this project touches every employee in the company. That's certainly a challenge. And so, in the project, communications, recurring communications, extensive training, and persistence were critical for that. And then finding some champions amongst all those different groups to participate in the project, because we really wanted this project from the very beginning to be an operational tool and an operational driven success, not an IT project. And so getting these folks involved and keeping them involved and engaged and continuing to sell them on the dream. And I say the second piece is listening. Now, the other real challenge that we had was data. And many companies using J.D. Edwards struggle with a lot of the same thing of their address book not being maintained as nicely as they would like, and employee records and job records, perhaps having data that's not really representing what's going on in the job. So there was a lot of work to do, and that was probably the number one thing that we would, in looking back, that was more of a challenge than we had expected going in.
You mentioned, working with the business and selling to the business. I think you mentioned to me before about the hole in the saw. Can you elaborate about that?
Yeah, of course. And this is a common thing with a lot of people in IT, right? We get so excited about the technology,
right?
And we weren't selling them on time and attendance or on ePay or any of the systems that we used. We were selling them on the idea of having daily labor in front of them in a very simple, dashboard, which is what they were really looking for. So they're looking for, at the end of the day, for one, not having to have a burden of worrying about payroll. In other words, it's correct. They're not having employees come in with bad check, not getting paid correctly, and all those kinds of problems. And that's what we talked about, not the technology.
Right. So whole there was the time and attendance.
Yes.
Being accurate.
Yes. Being
able to see your labor. That's the whole. You're selling the whole. They don't care what the saw was, right?
No, they don't. They wouldn't care whether we were using ePay, Kronos, Workday, any of those other products. It was more about what's it going to do for me, and maintain it. And really, this is at all levels too. So, when we were talking to the employees and to the supervisors, they all had sort of their own different, how do you say it, view of the whole. Mm-hmm. So for the employees, it was, you're going to get paid correctly. You're going to get your overtime right. You're going to get paid on time. You're not going to have to worry about getting your check and going, oh, they missed 8 hours this week. So that's one way to motivate the employee to participate in the process, because everybody wants to be paid properly. When you look at the management team, it's about having that, the local management team is about having that clean budget and that clean labor, and being able to see their performance every day of where they're at, right? In an easy way. They could do some of that now, but it took a lot of Excel and reports, and by the time you pulled it all together, it was so much effort that it was almost not worth it.
Right.
And we've made it really effortless for them with this process. So they actually have a dashboard. We did this through Insight's Hubble product, which is fantastic. And these guys have a purpose-built dashboard that shows them their job performance in the current calendar month, including the forecast of that job. So literally when an operator connects in, say on the 2nd of December, they can see how job X is going to perform against budget in the month of December based on how the job's been performing, right? I mean, it was really that was a big breakthrough. Now, you look at, for example, our head of HR and head of legal, right? Their concerns and our risk department are compliance. How are we going to avoid those Department of Labor audits or that union grievance, right? Or rid ourselves of the risk of a collective bargaining or a class action suit from an employee who's claiming they're not getting their meal breaks or whatever. So everybody had a different hole in this, but at the end of the day, the big hole for everybody, right, was having the best labor management solution in the world.
Yeah.
And we are on our way to doing that. We've made tremendous progress. But it's a journey, and that's the other message I think that's really critical. And we talked about this yesterday, Victor, in the session with some of your customers. These types of projects are not projects; they're programs, and you have to invest in them, recognizing that the organization changes over time. So we took great lengths at the beginning to recognize this wasn't a one and done sort of exercise, that it was going to take time to take an organization this big to evolve and the whole change management to really get using it right. But what it required to do that is having the right number of people, not just for the project, but ongoing on a support side to do this, recognizing that we have a fair amount of turnover at all levels in management. So we have training webinars that we run twice a week. We've been doing them since we started this project. And they're scheduled, go to webinar deal, it's up on the calendar, and anybody can join anytime. So when you have turnover people coming in, they already know there's training scheduled, so we're not getting bombarded with that one-off request. Or what happened typically, and what happens in a lot of IT projects, right? You do a lot of the training up front, and then you kind of move the whole crowd, right, the fire drill thing, to the next project. And then you get a new person out in the field who wasn't here when it started, and they're not getting the same training and exposure that folks got early on. And so you end up picking up bad behaviors because they're really learning how to use it from someone else who may have gotten the training and forgot bits and pieces. And you get that whole trickle down effect of after several generations of turnover, the person using it is only picked up 70% of the person before, 70%. By the time you get to that third generation, they know about 25% of what they need to know. So having that ongoing training and making it easy for the users and eliminating a lot of excuses too. And I think this is worth talking about for a minute, because there's always this battle between IT and field users, right? When they say, well, we didn't get trained, right? That happens all the time. And you hear that time and time again, a lot of these projects. Now, there may have been a webinar 2, 3, or 4, and maybe they were there, maybe they weren't. But it was really powerful as we ran into a couple of stumbles and a few branches. And I remember being on a few of the calls, and one of the districts out there would say, well, we didn't get any of the, we didn't get the training. And the general manager on the call said, what are you talking about? They offer training in the beginning, we were doing it 3 or 4 times a week. They've been offering training on a scheduled basis from the start of this, the very beginning of the project, and ongoing. And so it really kind of flipped the model a bit, and it took all the excuses away from the folks who didn't want to participate. And what was interesting is it wasn't us defending ourselves and saying, well, we offered training. They were telling their own people, that's not an excuse. You follow what I'm saying?
Yes, absolutely.
And so that's a big part of this, is really setting the project up so it can't fail, and eliminating, I don't want to say the excuses, but the reasons, I guess you'd say, why people might fail. Right.
So a lot of it seems more, most IT folks, and even from your background as a technologist, we're heavily involved in the technology piece, but it sounds like most of the challenges you face were dealing with people, dealing with the business. As IT leader and executive, how would you say part of your job is really marketing?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it is. And, a lot of people think of marketing as just the advertising and promotion side. But the real key to marketing in IT is the listening component, right? Aligning what you're doing and letting it evolve with where the market is. So absolutely, and that is a key function of product management, if you will, right? Of marketing. But specifically, it was a lot of promotional work too, and communication. So absolutely, it is.
Yeah.
And I think more IT folks in some areas would be more successful if they understood that essential part of change management is it's the people. And probably the best piece of evidence of this, and any callers listening to this could probably relate. You'll see cases of the same software being implemented in two different organizations. One wildly successful, everybody's loving it, and another one fails. It's the same software. It's not the technology, right? The technology enables the solution, but it's a small part of it, really. And to your point, the majority of this work or effort was around change management. And I think to speak to that, and this is very critical for time and attendance in particular, because I actually was a COO for a time and attendance company for several years. So I got a lot of exposure to watching failed time and attendance projects. And I put several in at my former companies. To varying degrees, they were successful earlier in my career, but there was plenty of failures too. And what ends up happening with these things is if you don't measure the effective use of the product, you have no idea how well it's really being used. And so we used Hubble not only to produce our dashboards for the monthly labor forecasting that I spoke of earlier, but we also created one around compliance. And so we were looking at the transaction records coming out of our time and attendance system to spot the behaviors we didn't want to see happen. Classic example, Victor punches in at 8 in the morning and punches out at 4:08. Hey, you're supposed to leave at 4, but you're kind of hanging out the clock a little long or whatever. So that's going to round you up to 4:15. Now, we really don't want to pay you the extra 15 minutes, but employees will try to do that. Sometimes they'll shuffle to the back of the line or whatever. The supervisor on site, what they're supposed to do is counsel you the first time and say, look, Victor, you need to punch out before 7 minutes after the hour, right? And it's okay if we go adjust your time that first day, because clearly you didn't work to 4:15.
I wanted that extra 15 minutes of pay.
Right. But what we're measuring is how often is that happening and if we see patterns, because a time change to the Department of Labor is like the worst thing you can do. I mean, and we already have overtime and all that taken care of, meal breaks, but still it comes down to people manipulating the time. And so one of the measures we have is how much time manipulation is happening. The other one is how much manual time is going into the system. And this is one that gets missed by a lot of organizations. They put time and attendance, they put their clocks out there, they get people starting to use it, but nobody's looking at how many sites where they're just manually entering the person's time in the system. Right, and it could be quite a bit actually in some cases. And they don't want to put a clock in, the clock's not working, and they want to give the guy a phone, whatever it is. There's a lot of waste and overhead sitting behind that, but it's not visible to anybody. So we measure it, and we've been measuring it from the start. We also measure how long does it take from the time Victor punches in until his time is reconciled completely and done in terms of hours. So if you punch in on Monday, and your time isn't corrected until the following Monday night, the day before payroll, right? That would basically be about 160-hour lag from the time you punch in. Well, we want everybody looking at time every day and correcting the day before. So we measure correction lag is another one of those measures. Anytime somebody's changing somebody's rates, we look at that. Well, anyway, there's about 5 measures that we use in this process, and we roll all that up to a score by job, by week, and then we roll it up at a company level and produced a balanced scorecard to rank all the companies in terms of where were they performing. And what was really interesting about doing this for this in particular is nobody wanted to be at the bottom. Right?
Competition.
Yeah, it created a very healthy competition. But what it did even more than that, honestly, although that was important, and certainly in the early stages there was, I'm at the top, you're down here. But what it really did though is because you get this message often in the business, we're different, and I'll give you a classic example. I remember speaking with one of our fellows down in Tucson. He said, but Anthony, our labor here in the Tucson market is different. That's why we have these scores. And I said, well, I want to challenge you on that because your market, your makeup of jobs is very similar to what we're doing in the Great Plains region. And we kind of talked through it, and he goes, yeah, that sounds right. That's how we are too. I said, take a look at Charlie's scores. Okay, Charlie was one of the guys at the top. And he said, well, I don't know how he's doing it. I said, why don't you give him a call and talk to him? He can tell you what he's done with his operations folks to get them aligned. So the second piece of this is it created an informal framework of collaboration amongst managers when they see somebody else has figured it out. And maybe they're not getting it quite right in their area.
Maybe they're not really that different, but they're doing things differently to achieve some of those goals.
So what are they doing? And it also created a basis for us to say it's possible. And that's the most important part. You know, when you have, in the beginning, I recall, because everything is on a 0 to 4 grade scale, right? That's how we do those 4 metrics, and then the roll-up metric, kind of like you're back in school. You get an F is a 0 and an A is a 4, right? So when we ran the scorecard the first time, we had, I think it was 8 companies above a 3.0 and only 2 above a 3.5. We had a whole bunch that were like D minuses and Ds, right?
Ouch.
And fast forward now of 9 months having this dashboard in place and recursive training on our part to go back and help them where we saw gaps, because now we could see the dashboard too and drill down and see where the issues are to the specific issues. And that's very important too. It's one thing to say you got a problem. It's another thing to be able to say you got a problem and here's what it is and here's who it is and here's the job site it's on. And then you can have conversations around how to fix it. Mm-hmm. But our scores have improved dramatically. And one example, I think that's the most relevant, is manual time. Okay, when we started this process, manual time was in the 14 to 15% range. When we produced the dashboard, we had already moved it down to 11. 6 months later, it's down under 6. And our goal by end of Q1 is 2%.
Wow.
Now, that would not have been possible. And I could tell you from, without having the visibility to the tool and having a team in place to help drive the behavior and a lot of executive support around that's unacceptable, right? So it's all of it. It's the push down support, but even if you've got management saying they want these things, if there's no way to see the problem, you don't even know it's there. Mm-hmm. And I could tell you, for most companies that are using time and attendance systems, they probably have numbers similar to where we started, but they have no idea. And they don't find out about what's going wrong until the Department of Labor comes in, does an audit, and they go, oh my God, I thought everybody was using this thing right, and they weren't using it right in this job or this set of jobs, because there's no visibility to it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I mean, it comes back, I think, to kind of the age-old adage of you can't manage what you can't measure, right? And you can't make sure that your people are compliant and performing without having those tools to measure those things. It sounds like this has been a great journey for you, and the journey continues, as you mentioned. If you were to advise another executive, another IT leader on some of the lessons that you learned from this, mm-hmm. what would those be? Any advice that you would give to others on how to implement something that's this transformational?
Well, the first one is sell the whole. I mean, you have to have a big vision. Kind of talked about that already. The second one would probably be around communications and training. Over-communicate, over-train. The third is establish a core team of champions who can help move the ball forward with you that are in the operation. In other words, some confidants who can tell you, and you got to be willing to listen too. And I know in my past in projects, sometimes that's where we really fell down. We established what we thought was the right way to do it, and anytime somebody was struggling with it, our first response was, well, you're doing it wrong, as opposed to, well, help me understand what the issue is, and then working through that. So being really open to that. Probably making sure you put in a reasonable timeline too. Too often I think, and we were fortunate this way because we set an approach that we wanted to take and a sequence that we wanted to follow, but everyone in the organization understood that this was quite a big deal. And so we didn't just set some arbitrary deadline to go live, and whether we were ready or not, just did it. And that happens too often in companies. And sometimes you have to do that, maybe because there's some external factors or whatever, large customer you got to have in place by then. But in this case, this was internally directed, and it was viewed as a long range, sort of transformation project. Again, it's not a one-time thing, but taking more of that approach instead of locking yourself into some ridiculous schedule that doesn't make sense and adhering to the schedule for the schedule's sake, So that would be one bit of advice I would give for a project where there's significant change management is allowing for that. I don't think we did as good of a job as we could have in really understanding how much it was going to require to change some of these folks. We probably could have reached out to the frontline employees a little bit more than we did. Spent more time out on the front end of this than we did.
Yeah.
A little bit too much in Excel, a little bit too much theoretical analysis, and not enough, let's go watch some people as they're doing it kind of stuff.
Hands-on, face-to-face interaction.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like you've tackled quite a bit of the challenges, and now you guys are moving ahead with some new things. So what I'd be interested in is, you got this time and attendance system in place. What are your priorities today with different initiatives or either continuing initiatives? What's your vision for ISS now that you've been there for quite some time, and how does that compare to some of the technology trends out there?
Well, that's a great question, Victor. Interestingly enough, mobile is where it's at, right? And the nice thing about where mobile technology is today is, the costs have come down dramatically in the last 2 years. As an example, only with ePay, when we started this project, we were spending about $1.50 a month on a smartphone, right? And now we're well under $50 for a smartphone. It's just in 18 months, right? And today a smartphone is less than an analog phone cost us 2 years ago. Yeah. The point to that is, with a large labor force like we have, a mobile solution would have been viewed as cost prohibitive 2 years ago. But the costs have come down so much that we are in the process right now. In fact, we're literally this week we are transforming to a Verizon device payment plan, switching from iPhones to Samsung Galaxy J3 devices for every user. And as part of that transition, though, we're outfitting the devices to prepare ourselves for what we want to do next. And I'll just elaborate on that for a second. So we're putting Wandera on every phone.
What is that?
Wandera is an internet proxy app. So and also MOS 360, the IBM product for application control.
Wow.
So when you really want to venture into pushing production applications out on your phone, you have to have a good control over the infrastructure. This almost mirrors what we dealt with desktop management 20 years ago, right? Because the phone is now the new desktop, right? And so you have to have all those controls. So, our vision is to outfit the organization, outfit every employee ultimately, but probably initially supervisors, and then it will expand, but with more. Right now, ePay runs, for example, on a mobile phone. Our CMMS system for work order management is already mobile enabled. But we see ordering, sales orders through JD Edwards, purchase orders, work orders, being able to change your employee profile, all those things, along with, really delivering training and process information to employees through the mobile device. So really a way of connecting our 16,000 employees with the organization better than we can today. So if you kind of look at this kind of big picture, one of the challenges a lot of large blue collar companies have, especially ones that are distributed like ours are, right, where the employees don't come into the office. You've got at least 3-4 layers of management between them and, let's say, our country manager, and in some cases 5 layers. How do you get the message out to all 16,000 employees? How do employees, if they have an accident, how do they know how to report that easily? So, the vision is to ultimately have that entire suite of tools that an employee needs to conduct the things that are most important to us available at their fingertips, because none of these employees have computers. They're service employees out of jobs.
But they have phones, right?
But they have phones. And so that's definitely, and I think that aligns with where the market's going and where the expectations are, especially with millennials coming into the business. Now, our business isn't really attractive to millennials, but there are some. But even those next generations of folks are now comfortable using mobile technology, and they're looking for it too. It's like, I can do my online banking, I can go shop for my Christmas on the phone, but I can't change my employee profile. I have to call somebody or fill out a manual form. And organizations, I think, are really struggling, big corporate organizations, with our inability to provide the same experience that they get at home and being able to do whatever they want or even on their phone. So that's a big one. That's a large project on a whole bunch of levels. But right now we are getting the foundation in place to then be able to do that.
Yep, that makes perfect sense. Thank you so much, Anthony. So that was Anthony Lackey, executive. What did I say?
Senior Vice President of IT.
Senior Vice President at ISS Facilities, North America. Thank you, Anthony.
You're welcome.
And that concludes today's interview with Anthony Lackey, the Senior VP of IT from ISS Facilities. I want to touch on what he was talking about, setting expectations and being open to feedback. You got to talk to your end users, and you have to make sure that the process that you're implementing is good for them as well as it is for the business. Also, I'm really impressed with how he was able to shift the company's culture and allow collaboration and healthy competition to drive improvement, opposed to policies and procedures that are pushed down from the top. You grow it organically and you change the culture, and that allows for positive change.
Yeah, that was a great interview by Anthony and Victor. And one of the things that stood out for me was how ISS was able to reduce error correction down from 3% to less than 0.5%. And that's because they were implementing the things that you just talked about right now. And for any future businesses or organizations that are trying to implement their visions that are big, that it works. And there are examples out there who've done it before.
Maybe in the future we can touch base with Anthony again and get some more information on how this project's progressed, because he said it's always a work in process, and that hopefully over the next year and years, possibly, they're going to make major improvements in this.
Yeah, I definitely think that our listeners will really enjoy that.
From all of us here at Smartbridge TechCast, thank you for listening. If you'd like to find out more, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, or the Smartbridge blog, where we talk about tools, techniques, and trends in the technology industry.
Now get out there and create something exceptional.